All right, Mr. Spore here, biology class, the online outside edition. Welcome. Okay, so in this next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at one particular branch of biology called ecology, the study of ecosystems and how living things interact with each other. Fun stuff. Everything that we do is going to be posted in Google Classroom, and I'll break it up by week. Each week is going to be 2 assignments. So this week we'll focus on the first one here, which is this lecture itself, the presentation, slides 1 through 15. I'll have that posted. And then I have a note sheet, and you're going to follow along this presentation, fill this note sheet out. Most of it is going to be directly from the slideshow itself, and some of it may be things that I elaborate on as I like to talk and blah, 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 blah. Okay, and explain things. The next assignment is an article I found from Khan Academy, and I posted a Google form with some questions about that article on there. So answer those. Both of these are due by Friday of this week. All right, let's get into the presentation then. So like I said before, ecology is the study of not just living things, that's biology, right? But ecology is a study of the interactions of living things and how these not only shape living things, but then shape the entire world around us that we see. So by definition, of how living things interact with each other and their environment. So living things are shaped by their environment, and they also shape their environment. It kind of goes both ways. Populations of living things really are the things that shape things. So these birds, nesting on this cliff, they have to interact with each other, right? These murres are interacting with each other, either trying to find mates or trying to, find areas to lay their eggs. Some of these other different species of birds interact with the murres, maybe compete for territory, maybe they have slightly different nesting requirements, and they also interact with the physical world around them. The wind, the rain, the ocean, the rocks, all of these things impact not just individuals, but populations and entire ecosystems itself. Mainly when we think about interactions, a lot of what we see on TV or that catches our attention is the real dramatic, predator-prey stuff, right? This murre is going to hunt down this fish and swim, or this eagle is going to swoop down and grab a bird, and that's kind of what makes for good videos, good documentaries. But there's many, many other types of interactions that we're going to dive into that are a little more nuanced and subtle, but just as fascinating and just as impactful, on the world around us as well. This picture is cool because there's several different layers going on here, right? The eagle is swooping down on these nesting murres down in here and trying to grab an adult bird, right, and swoop off and eat it. And so the birds down here are flustered by the eagle, of course, trying to avoid it, and the gulls are taking advantage of that situation by coming in and stealing chicks and eggs. So they're kind of taking advantage of the chaos. So there's several different levels of interactions going on right in this image right here. So in order to understand what is shaping and driving ecosystems and how things in nature are arranged, it's important for us to understand what a species is. We often talk in biology about living organisms, and a lot of biology focuses just on the organism. But how do we differentiate one organism from the next, not just as individuals, but as different species? And it gets kind of muddy. The way that biologists do that is we've come up with a definition as a species is a group of individuals who are genetically related and who can breed and produce fertile young. Most of the time this holds true, right? Most of the time this is obvious. A giraffe is a giraffe, a lion's a lion, a koala is a koala. They live in different places and they look completely different. They behave differently, and they're genetically different. But there are a lot of things that are genetically close. So individuals are not members of the same species if their members cannot produce fertile offspring. But at times, some species look very similar and are very closely related genetically. It's kind of hard to draw that line there. So that's where we do the produce fertile offspring. Do they interbreed or not? So here we have a picture of a common murre, and then we have a thick-billed murre. These are 2 closely related seabirds. They're in the same genus. The urea part of their name is their genus name, which shows their group. Just like we're in the genus Homo, and then we are Homo sapiens. So there's been other hominid species, Homo neanderthalis. They were cavemen, so a different species from us. Looked really similar to us. So these 2 different murre species, they behave differently. They have slight differences in how they look as well. Thick-billed myrrh has a white mustache and a V going up. The common myrrh is more chocolate brown, no mustache, and more of a straight line right across the neckline here. This is important when we're looking at populations and communities in ecosystems, which we're going to get into. Now, sometimes species like this can overlap and interbreed. Grizzly bears and polar bears, for instance, at times have overlapped and interbred, and you get these weird hybrids. But as a rule, they don't, and the longer they stay apart, the more they'll diverge genetically over time and become their own unique species that really stands out. So there's gray areas here too in biology when talking about a species. So when we're looking at ecosystems, when we're looking at how individuals and how species interact with each other, we look at it in kind of 4 different levels, and each level has its we have our ability to kind of see different things at these different levels and understand ecosystems in different ways. So living things that can be organized into 4 different levels. And in order to understand this, we need to know what a species is, so we talked about that. So the first level of organization in an ecosystem is you can just look at individual organisms. So an individual is any individual living unit. It can be single-celled or multi-celled. If it's multi-celled, it's one big clump of cells that all have the same DNA that are all functioning together. Generally in ecology, we don't focus on the organism. This is more of like other branches of biology, right? We, as humans, tend to think about studying things as individuals because we think the individual is the most important. But in ecosystems and really in nature, individuals come and go. They don't have a big impact. What matters most is not the individual, but the next level up in an ecosystem, the population. So a population is a group of organisms of the same species that live together in the same area, so they have to be interacting. In ecology, we're talking about interactions. So examples of populations, of course, are all these myrrhs here. These are all the same species. They're all interacting on this cliff. Now, this is a different population. This is about 1,000 miles away. They're both thick-billed myrrhs, but these ones are in a different island, like I said, 1,000 miles away, so you would consider that a separate population. And you can think about populations in human terms as well. Our town of Tillamook is a population versus Portland is a separate population versus another town is a different population, right? And the less we interact, the more distinct of a population we become. So same species together in the same area interacting. This is really where change happens in biology and in evolution as well, is on the population level. If you step up from a population, the next level in an ecosystem, when you kind of look around, is the community. And that's all the different populations of different species that live and interact in one area. So just sitting in my backyard here, you can see behind me I've got a bunch of willow trees. And they're not all the same species. I got 2 different species of willow here. And the coast willow and then the black willow, those are 2 different populations. And so that's a community behind me. It's a community of producers of plants. And then I got lots of birds singing around me as well. Not just individuals, but groups, right? Populations. So I got a population of warblers you can hear. I got a population of American goldfinches. Again, that would be the bird community, so to speak. And altogether, this is my ecological community that surrounds me here. There is one difference then that's going to separate this from the next level, right? Why isn't this an ecosystem? There's something missing that we haven't added here, right? So we've got a population on this photo of crested auklets, a population of horned puffins. I took this picture on Bull Deer Island in Alaska. So this is a community. What makes this community different from this community over here of the fish and the sea star and the coral and the feather worms? Well, it's the ecosystem, but what do we have to add to make an ecosystem? And to make an ecosystem, there's one thing we have to add still. Well, several things. We have to add in the physical environment itself. If you change the physical world around it, that will affect the community. What separates this, right, community from this community here, they live in a completely different physical environment, right? One is in the air, basically, on land, in the atmosphere, and the other is, in the hydrosphere, underwater. So an ecosystem is made up of that community of organisms plus their physical abiotic environment around them, the physical world. And there's four main features we're going to talk about next in the abiotic environment that affect life here on Earth, but water, temperature, the amount of sunlight, energy you get, and the soil and the nutrients. Okay. So here's a photo collage that I put together. This was on this tiny island of this is Ecological Island, and my cabin, you can't really see it. It's that little dark spot right there where my cursor is. That's where I lived for 3 months with one other person. This isle was a little over 1 mile long and a little under a half-mile wide. It was just one basic big mountain with a cliff on one side, and you can see the cliff side over here, and then a gentle slope on the other. But it had hundreds of thousands of birds that nested on this island, and then plants and all kinds of other things. And this made up a very unique little ecosystem here. Now, you couldn't just take this island, this community, and move it to Hawaii, right? What would happen to all the living organisms here? Well, the abiotic environment would change so much that it would completely change the ecosystem. They're adapted to the abiotic environment. Each individual community is. And when we're talking about abiotic, what I mean by that term is non-living. When you put an A in front of something, it means not. So this is the not biotic factors that influence and shape ecosystems. And these shape not just communities, not just populations, but they shape individual organisms. Over time, as populations change, individuals within that population will change over time, or the population will change. Anyway, we can get into that when we cover evolution. And they are. The main four abiotic factors are water, temperature, sunlight energy, and then soil nutrients. These are the things here on planet Earth, and really on any other planet in the solar system, that would affect living things the most. And the top two on here that change the most as you move around planet Earth, as I go from here just up to Mount Hood or even over to Bend, Oregon, the two of these factors that would have the most variance, which would change the most over the landscape as I traveled, would be the water and temperature. The amount of water, it rains about 100 inches here, rains about 50 inches in Portland, Oregon, and then it rains about 18 inches in Bend, Oregon. So there's a huge variance in the amount of water, and that affects the vegetation, and then that affects the wildlife. And also the temperature differences, right? The difference in the temperature between, me down here on the coast and at the top of Mount Hood is substantial, and that also has a great effect on living things. The amount of sunlight we get is pretty much, consistent between here and Bend, Oregon, and places like that. It changes over, big areas of the Earth, not small ones. And so ecosystems are shaped by these non-living factors. And here's some examples that I posted of ecosystems just within Oregon. And so I was just talking about this. Here on the coast, we get 100 inches of rain. So these coastal forests that we have, I'll turn on my pointer, zoom, zoom. These coastal forests that we have are really dense with vegetation that never gets too cold here. It never stays below freezing for weeks or months on end. We don't get covered in snow. So plants really grow all winter here. They grow well all winter here. The summers, pretty cool in the summertime, so not too hot. Plants grow well all summer here as well. So it's a very lush environment. It's a rainforest. It's called the temperate coniferous rainforest. As you travel, again, over Mount Hood, it snows up there. It gets frozen part of the year. It gets really cold, even in the summer at nighttime. And it's just a much harsher environment up there. So the types of trees, the types of plants, the landscape is just very different. So is the wildlife. Out in the ocean, of course, you've got a completely different environment there. Southern Oregon, the Siskiyou Mountains have a really unique landscape. The Oregon Dunes, and then Eastern Oregon, the sagebrush, Great Basin Desert also. So all of these different ecosystems are the result of those abiotic factors, shaping the things that live there and the things that live there over time, that adapting to those. So evolution by natural selection, populations are shaped by their environment. And the forms of organisms tell us about their environment. So you could look at some of these environments and kind of maybe even predict what types of animals you might be able to find there, or what they might look like, what types of adaptations they might need to have to survive there. And you'd probably be right. So a polar bear does really well in the Arctic, and you wouldn't expect to find one in our temperate forest. And if you put a salamander up here, it would turn into a popsicle salamander, which would be gross because they're poisonous. One of the things that often gets thrown in when we're talking about ecology are these things called biomes. And when looking at ecosystems, take a look at the graphic down here. I stop at ecosystem. Other than biosphere, which is the whole Earth, I stop at ecosystem. There are 4 levels of ecological organization. There's the individual, right? The individual organism, this little piece of grass right here, right? And then there's a population. So more than one piece of grass right here. This whole field full of grass around me. And then there's the community. Now we're going to add in all the different species, not just the grass, but the trees, right? The birds that are singing all around me. That makes up the community. And then lastly, the ecosystem is the physical forces, the rain, the sunlight, the temperature, the type of soil that's here, etc. That makes the ecosystem itself. Because ecology is about interactions. I don't consider biomes a part of ecology because biomes are formations of plants and animals that have a common characteristic due to similar climates. Biomes are things like deserts. Okay, that's cool. There's the Sonora Desert, and then there's the Chihuahuan Desert. There is the Atacama Desert in South America. There's, of course, the Sahara Desert. There's a desert. Most of Australia is a desert. That's cool, but these aren't the same ecosystem. You will get similar types of plants and animals in those desert biomes, but the plants and animals in Australia's deserts are not interacting with those in the Sahara's deserts. They don't impact each other directly at all. So it's not really a branch of ecology because we're not talking about interactions. It's a picky point, but I think it's an important one. You have tropical rainforests. The big 3 would be the Amazon, the Congo, and then throughout Indonesia in here. And again, these all have tropical species. They have some similarities, but they don't interact. So cool, but not really a branch of ecology. So I tend to throw biomes under the bus a little bit because they're interesting. Same, but different. Things, you got some tropical plants, cool, but they're not related, they don't interact, so why are we talking about it? If you want to jump from ecosystem, you could talk about the biosphere. And the biosphere is the part of the planet with living organisms in it. The biosphere includes most of Earth, right, or the surface of Earth, and includes all of the oceans and the atmosphere. You can drill down in rock 2 miles and find bacteria in places. It goes very deep into the ocean, to the deepest depths of the oceans, and then even down into the crust again with those bacterial and microbes. The biosphere extends up into the atmosphere. There's spores that circle the Earth in the jet streams released by lichens and mosses and other things that are up there. And of course, there's birds flying around and stuff. So when talking about the interactions of living things, if you want to go above ecosystem, you can get global to biosphere, and things that we do to the biosphere impact multiple ecosystems. So you dump a bunch of pollution in the ocean here off the coast of South America, and it will flow into, right, all the way over into Indonesia here, and it can impact that ecosystem, and it can impact all the ecosystems along the way. So even though this one maybe doesn't interact with this one here, on the abiotic level, you could really impact the multiple ecosystems if you go big and go global on the biospheric level. And here's a picture of some of just the biomes, so similar type ecosystems around the planet. And the reason for that is there's similar climates as you go around the planet. You've got the equator right down through here, and that creates your tropical areas, and you've got deserts on each side of that. And if you go far enough away from the equator, it gets cold. Up in the north, we have like the tundra and stuff like that. And the reason why we don't have that in the south is because it's mostly ocean until you get all the way to Antarctica, and then it's just a big chunk of ice. So to recap then, ecology is the study of the interactions of living things, and they have to be interacting in their ecosystem. And we can break we can look at ecology at different levels. So we can study ecology at different levels. We can look at it looking at the individual organism, but again, most ecologists don't spend time here. A group of the same species living in the same areas, a population. This is really where ecologists tend to focus a lot of time, because we want to keep populations healthy. You want to keep a population of salmon or of elk or of trees healthy, whatever your particular field is. Community is the next level up, and there are definitely community biologists and ecologists out there. Most foresters practice a type of community ecology because they're looking at keeping the entire forest ecosystem healthy, like multiple different tree species and how they interact and shape each other. And then lastly, there's the ecosystem itself, the community plus the abiotic. And we're going to look at some of the different ecosystems around Earth. We're also going to be looking at how living things, the types of interactions that living things have in here. And we're going to look at, how populous an ecosystem can be, how many different things can we fit into it, and why. So flow of energy and biodiversity. Those are the things we're going to cover in this unit. I just wanted to give you a short introduction here. So use that information to fill out the class notes and then read that article as well. It's good. It covers a lot of what we talked about here with a little more elaboration in certain areas. And show up to the class meetings on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And have a great week, everybody.